in-depth exploration of the world of women today with Samantha Dean.
Good evening. Tonight on Woman, we're going to be talking about the sexual development of the child and the parental role played in this development. Our guest is Dr. Mary Calderone, who is the Executive Director and co-founder of SIECUS. That's the Sex Information and Education Council of the United States. Dr. Calderone, to start off, I'd like to ask you, what are the first signs of sexual awareness in a small child?
I think that the first thing that parents will notice is the discovery of pleasurable sensations when the child touches certain parts of his body, particularly the genitalia. Actually, this is totally normal because the parents encourage exploration by the child of his own body. You know, where's your nose and where's your ears and where's your hands and fingers and your tummy button. And then they always stop in the diaper area. And they're liable to get quite upset when the child finds his genitalia and gets pleasure out of touching them. But this is really entirely normal. And I think this is probably the first sign of the awakening sensations in the child.
And at what age does this usually take place?
Oh, it can happen very young, at 3 or 4 months. It can happen at 6 months. It was found by Kinsey that perhaps 30% of boy babies had had an orgasm in the first year of life. The second thing that a boy baby does after yelling is to have an erection. These are things that most people aren't aware of. In other words, children are born with the potentiality of becoming fully sexual people. If they weren't born that way, we'd have to call them abnormal.
Mm-hmm. And how should parents react to this first demonstration of sexuality in the child?
I think that most psychiatrists, physicians today, agree that the parents don't have to react at all. They can be happy that their child is normal, and that's about it.
Mm-hmm.
And not be scared that their child is going to grow up a sex maniac or something like that.
Right. Well, we've established that sexuality is present virtually from birth or from a few weeks or months afterwards. When should you make your first conscious effort at educating a child along these lines?
Well, it's interesting that you use that word conscious, because it depends a lot on what you've been doing unconsciously. Mm-hmm. Most parents aren't aware, I think, of how much they do unconsciously in sex education of their children, which literally begins at birth. There's no question about it that the child begins to sense what a woman is, what a man is, by the way the parents pick up the child, handle the baby. The child gets to feel that a woman is a soft, giving, warm creature who smells deliciously of milk and has a soft voice and loving arms. Possibly the child finds that a woman is not this kind of a person. That a woman is a hard, rejecting, hostile creature who has angry tones in her voice, perhaps when she speaks to the father. And then that's sex education, because the child begins to associate these qualities with what a woman is. Certainly the way the parents see each other and treat each other as man and woman. This is the very earliest sex education that a child can get. If the parents are loving and warm and accepting to each other and of each other and accepting of themselves as man and woman and happy in being man and woman and being together as man and woman, this is the best sex education that a child can have, particularly if the parents can express this love to each other. I mean, I don't mean necessarily in front of the child, but the aura is there of love and satisfaction in each other, and the child senses this very, very early.
So continued expressions of affection, demonstrations of affection are very, very important to a child's development.
I think so, yes, particularly in the tones of the voice and in the warmth with which the child is drawn into this circle of love and affection and acceptance. Mm-hmm. Dr. Masters always says that the best sex education a child can have is a father giving mommy a pat on the fanny as he goes through the kitchen while she's doing the dishes or something like that. Of course, maybe he'll be doing the dishes, maybe she'll pat him on the fanny
Hopefully.
when she goes by. Could be, and it probably is.
Yes.
Certainly in many young households.
Well, when should you take it one step further and actually talk about
information?
Information.
Yes. I think that's a very important question. Many parents want to know if they should bring up the subject if their children haven't asked. And it's true that, you know, the old joke, where did I come from, Mommy, and the long involved discussion, and the child really wanted to know they came from Brooklyn or Buffalo. It's true that there are teachable moments But if a child hasn't, by the age of 4 or so, begun to ask about babies and where they come from and how they're made, I would definitely make it my business, if I were a parent, to bring up the topic, because there's always somebody in the neighborhood having a baby, and this is a golden opportunity to tell this wonderful story of where babies come from, which of course is just the reproductive story. It's not the full sexual story, but it lays the groundwork for an easy and warm acceptance of the role of the father and the mother in the creation of the baby, which comes a little bit later.
Yeah, it seems that most preschoolers' knowledge of sex is in the area of reproduction, and they sort of imagine that sex, or reproduction rather, is the sole purpose for sex, and that you have sex maybe 4 or 5 times a year, in a lifetime rather, depending on how many children
It
you
isn't only
have.
preschoolers. I've heard 12-year-old boys say, well, I guess my mom and dad did it 3 times because there's 3 of us.
Right, yes.
And this is really quite sad, because what it does is to leave the young with the idea that sex is only and purely for reproduction, when the churches, we all know that the other and equally important role is the deepening of the relationship between the husband and the wife.
So when should you bring up the idea of the pleasure concept?
I think that the joy of the sexual relationship between husband and wife is something that can be very easily communicated by indicating that people do not have intercourse just to have a baby, that they really do it because they love each other, that it's a tremendously private thing, only for a mother and father together, and that modern medicine has made it possible to have this beautiful relationship without necessarily having it result in the baby every time. Now that is easily understood by the child of 5, and that lays the groundwork for later acceptance of the whole principle of family planning, which is so vital to our welfare these days.
Then you've necessarily got to incorporate birth control in your discussions.
Not the techniques.
Not
I
the
don't think
techniques.
that's important at all, because by the time the child is grown up, the techniques will have changed. So why go into a long discussion about them? I think it's totally out of place. I really do.
What should your attitudes and approaches be to sex play in a child, you know, experimentation, playing doctors and this, that,
This
and
is
the other?
part of growing up. This is part of the experimentation of discovering another person's body besides your own. And again, it's not, shouldn't be made a matter of a big, story or hoop-de-doo, but taken as it goes. All parents have gone through it, and they lived through it, and they become perfectly normal, happy people, I presume. And children will keep on doing this till the ends of their days, till the end of mankind. I don't think it's a matter of tremendous concern, and I think it's a great pity if a big hassle is made of it in a neighborhood. Let's say if a little boy is found, as most little boys always do, picking up a little girl's skirts to see how a little girl is made. The little girls peek into the bathroom when their little brothers are going to the bathroom to see how little boys are made. This is par for the course. They want to know.
Because most of the books that you read nowadays on sex play advise the parents to take a rather intellectual approach to it, and certainly encourage questions and answer the questions, but advise the child that a more active approach to the subject is just not appropriate at the moment, which
Well,
I don't
that's
know how...
kind of intellectual, isn't it?
It is, exactly.
It
and I
seems to
don't know
me
how
that one should not
satisfactory
make too much of a thing about it. And children don't stay with this anyway. If they do stay with it, it's like masturbation. If it becomes obsessive, then the thing is not to treat the masturbation or the sex play, but to find out why the child has to resort to this in such an obsessive way. What is it that's going wrong about the child's life? Has he got anxieties of one kind or another? Is too much being asked of him, too much being loaded on him? Is he being expected to grow up too fast? Maybe he's been displaced by a baby brother or baby sister. There are any number of reasons why this could happen. We have a little booklet called Concerns of Parents About Sex Education that is really very helpful, because discusses how parents can overcome their own hesitation over discussing sexual matters, and should parents wait till the child asks, and can children learn appropriate behavior without intimidation. Many, many things that parents really would like to know.
And this is put out by your organization,
By Seekers, yes.
That's very interesting. You know, many people of my generation, and I'm sure older generations, have received themselves rather a faulty education sexually,
Yes.
and perhaps their
Most of us
parents
did.
neglected altogether to tell them anything about sex.
Or were afraid to,
or else
embarrassed to.
yes, right, they managed to create a sort of feeling of distaste and embarrassment about the whole subject. Do you think it's possible to break this cycle of repression just by wanting to be responsive to your children's questions?
Yes, it is. And I wish that parents could understand two things. One is that the welfare, the future welfare of their children's own marriages will depend a great deal on how the parents are willing, how much the parents are willing to move into this area, both the mother and the father, and give themselves to learning enough about it so they get comfortable with it. The second thing is something the parents don't realize. It's a fallout, sort of. It's an extra benefit, that their own sexual lives will become much better, much warmer, much freer, much more open with each other if they can bring themselves to do a little talking and studying together as husband and wife. And their children will benefit and they will benefit.
So it's a reciprocal thing.
It certainly
really.
is.
Yes.
It's a good investment.
What do you think about nudity in the home? Should parents walk about in front of their child in the nude?
Well, what I think, should or shouldn't, I don't think that's important. I think most psychiatrists agree that parents should do what they're comfortable doing. Now, a lot of people are very comfortable going around nude, and others are not. And I think it's all wrong to go hear that somebody, if Mary Calderon says I should go nude, to rush home and take off all your clothes, you're going to be very uncomfortable, and your children are going to be even more uncomfortable because it's just not in character.
Yes. Well, what do you feel the general consensus of opinion is on this matter?
Generally speaking, I think people realize that children have a natural modesty, and that up to the age of 5 and 6, they really enjoy going around without clothes, and I don't think they notice their parents too much. But after that, there's a beginning of closing of bathroom doors, and little boys tend to want to take their baths alone and things like that. And I think one should accede, and certainly one should guard one's own privacy, very definitely.
Do children go through a homosexual phase?
They certainly go through plenty of homosexual experiences, yes.
What age does this usually take place?
Oh, little boys play with little boys just the way they might like to play with little girls. And again, this doesn't mean that these children are going to be homosexual, because this is not the way homosexuality develops. It's a part of an experimental thing that all children go through. And they may do it later during adolescence too. And this still does not mean that they're going to be persons who are totally homosexually inclined.
There's a theory that we're all bisexual by nature. We all have male and female hormones and genes. And when sex education focuses on reproduction, it necessarily focuses on heterosexuality. Do you think this is rather limiting?
I think children should understand what homosexuality is. Actually, all of us should. We need to know that homosexuality develops in the same way and at the same time, same period in the child's life, that is future homosexuality, as heterosexuality. You have to understand one side of the coin and then flip it over until you understand the other fully. If a child is in a family situation in which the father is either absent or passive or else very punishing, so that the child really doesn't have a good father figure to identify with if he's a boy or to look up to if she's a girl, and the mother is very strong and very sort of controlling, this is one of the more common patterns of family life. It doesn't necessarily mean there will be a homosexual outcome, but eventual choice of a sex object is usually probably very much determined in the early years of life.
Well, how much should you say to your children about the alternatives to heterosexuality? I mean, should you talk about homosexual marriages and this sort of thing?
Well, later on, certainly they're going to be interested. They're going to see these things in the papers. That's during adolescence. But I don't think that this is necessarily a matter of discussion in the elementary school years. I do think that it's par for the course that boys at one time or another will have a homosexual advance made to them, perhaps in a public washroom, and they should be enough informed so that they don't panic and immediately think, oh, that must mean I'm a homosexual or something like that. And certainly we should understand that people who are homosexual, whether male or female, are not the people who commit the violent crimes. This is a very unjust thing that's been perpetrated against people who are homosexual. About 5% of males are homosexual in this country and about 2.5% of females. And they're not really much of a danger. Nobody was ever seduced into homosexuality. They had to be prepared to be homosexual long before in their early preschool years. And then they came out, as they say. But you can't be suddenly seduced into it if you're really a heterosexual, nor can you suddenly decide, I'm going to be a homosexual today. It's just as impossible as for a heterosexual to decide that, as for a homosexual to turn around and be cured and decide he's going to be heterosexual. It's this, as I say, it's two sides of the same coin. We really do need to understand these things.
Absolutely. What do you think of the importance of sex education in the schools versus
Oh, a
sex
lot of
education at home?
people are convinced that the schools have a role to play, particularly in the adolescent years, when it becomes a little more difficult, even for parents who have been very open with their children, to talk to their children about sex, for the simple reason that by the time of adolescence, the parents know their children are having heterosexual, very strong sexual feelings, and they themselves don't want to appear to have their privacy invaded by their own sexual feelings. It's a very difficult situation. So that many people feel that the schools and the churches that make an effort to not to take the parent's role, because nobody can take that away. Even an inadequate parent will have a role to play in the sex education of his or her child, but to supplement that role, particularly in the information area, that the schools and churches really do have a role to play.
Do you feel somehow that the teachers perhaps should be more specifically prepared than they are for
Well,
this?
they are being, yes.
They are. There's a consciousness raising going on there, is there?
Oh, there's not more than that. There's a lot of workshops going on. It's that old flu coming
dear,
back.
you got that?
Yeah.
Oh,
You see, I think most professionals today in the fields of education, medicine, the religions, nursing, social work, the major helping professions, have become aware that they have a stake in this. That it isn't just a matter of feeding the child a certain amount of information and the child's going to come out all right. It's far, far more than that. You're building a major building block of the child's personality, his sexuality. All of society has a stake in this process, because that's what it is, a long process from birth on up. And therefore, everybody who comes in contact with the child has a role to play, whether it's the teacher or the doctor or the nurse or the clergyman. We're all projecting images of ourselves as sexual people and providing images of what it is to be a man or a woman to the growing child, and the child observes very carefully. And when any of us, such as a teacher or a doctor, is in a position to provide good, sound, accurate information, we have a role to play, because many, many parents don't have that information. I wish to goodness they'd get it. I think I would like to see every parent in this country have a sound course in sex education themselves. They would benefit enormously, and their children would. And then perhaps we'd never have to worry about what the schools and the churches are trying to do. The churches, you know, have built very excellent courses in sexuality education right for their church schools.
well, is this happening a little bit today?
Oh, it's happening all over the place. Indeed it is.
Well, that's very good.
And yes, we're very glad about it.
Do you feel that these sex classes, though, have a danger of sort of standing out on the curriculum like a sore thumb? As you said, sex is an integral part of the total personality. Do you think they should be incorporated into different classes such as biology, science, physical education?
That's one
home
way of doing it,
economics?
and some schools try this way. Another way of doing it is to have a block every year, let's say a 5 weeks block in every class for 1 hour a day. That year is human sexuality for a certain block of time. We specially prepared teachers. I think actually it should be both ways at the same time. It's ridiculous to think you're going to learn all about sex in 1 hour in one class, and then when you go to English literature and you study the Scarlet Letter, what you're discussing is what? Punctuation and style, and you never discuss the central theme of the Scarlet Letter, which is how do a man and a woman treat each other in the light of a passion that leads them into great difficulty, a pregnancy and an unwanted child. Who was punished? What is our attitude today about the out-of-wedlock pregnancy? How do we treat people? And so forth. This is an enormous lesson in our attitudes about sexuality in our own culture. And I compare them with what they were in Hawthorne's day, or in Salem, you know, South Salem day.
You know, many women feel, particularly in the women's movement, that their intellectual growth was stunted at a certain point in childhood. Do you think it's possible to stunt or thwart the emotional development of a child just by perhaps denying his sexuality at a certain time, or by faulty education, and thereby diminishing his ability to love?
Yes, I'm afraid it is. I'm afraid that this is true, and I think this is why so many marriages are in trouble today, because especially with the people who are most vociferous in their anti-sexuality, I have a feeling that their own lives can't be very, knowledgeable, warm, fulfilled in the area of sex. And I think this is a terrible tragedy, because sexuality in a home in which the husband and wife accept each other as fully sexual people and are mutual in their joy and fulfillment in their sexual lives together, this is a very good home for children to grow up in.
How can we avoid this? What are some of the most common pitfalls that parents fall into in this area?
I think one of the most common, and children verbalize this very well, they will say, why do our parents always make sex seem dirty or dangerous to us? And this is a terrible thing, because here we're trying to prove that something is beautiful, but if we brought children up to think that it's dirty and dangerous, they can't suddenly turn around on their wedding night and think it's beautiful, and then function freely and warmly.
Do you think the emerging sexuality of a teenage daughter or son affects a parent to the I mean, what is the so-called norm? You sometimes see a father acting rather seductively with his teenage daughter, and you sometimes see a mother
Vice
obviously
versa.
feeling threatened, yes, and
The
vice
daughter can
versa.
act seductively. Well, when we
Is
mean
this-
seductively, we know we don't mean necessarily incest, of course, although this happens. No, we're talking about the kind of seduction that a boss can use with his secretary when he's paying her compliments so she'll stay and type those 3 extra letters. That doesn't mean he's going to go to bed with her. I don't know. I think this is part of the give and take of life. I think we all do this at one time or another. We use our sexuality in ways that are fun. I think a young girl likes to feel that her father finds her attractive. I think that one of the nicest things a father can do is to take his daughter out, his 14-year-old daughter out, and take her out to dinner at a restaurant all alone and make her feel like a grown-up young lady. He can show her well, how nice it is to be with a man and spend an evening with him and give each other the pleasure of their company. And he can do that better than anybody else can. And this is a great thing for his daughter. And the mother can do the same thing with her son. But the danger is, of course, if they begin to do this as an exclusive thing and to stand in the way of their children's really moving out, which is the time when they should move out, into other heterosexual relationships. And let me say this, that there are a number of very strong psychiatric observers in this country who feel that one of the contributing causes or reinforcements of homosexuality is our fear of adolescent heterosexuality. That if you've laid down a groundwork, for instance, for a later homosexual development, there is a possibility during adolescence of reversing that, provided you encourage good, strong, outgoing heterosexual relationships. Now, if you're trying to hold your daughter in or hold your son in, the mother's binding her son to her during adolescence, that homosexual bent may be fixated. On the contrary, heterosexuality should be encouraged. Dating should be encouraged, under good, wise social conditions, of course.
It seems to me that lots of parents have trouble in coming to terms with the emerging sexuality of their children.
Yes,
and
they do.
accepting it.
Yes, they do. They don't like to think of their darlings having sexual thoughts and having sexual feelings. And they should know that their darlings don't like to think of their parents having sexual thoughts and sexual feelings either. This is where the thing of privacy comes in, and why so many people feel that the clergyman, the teacher, the doctor has a role to play, particularly in the sex education of adolescents, in the discussion groups that are so important for adolescents, so that they can learn to understand each other as boys and girls.
There's a theory that boys are more preoccupied with their sex role in life than girls. Girls sublimate it, suppress it, or whatever. Do you think there's any biological foundation for this,
Yes,
or is
there
this
is.
just a cultural myth?
Yes, there is. First of all, automatically boys are going to achieve capacity for orgasm. If they haven't achieved it beforehand in masturbation, or sometimes very early, maybe by 1 year of age, They will certainly achieve it at puberty with a wet dream. And by the age of 18, 100% of males, practically speaking, have achieved capacity for orgasm. And so they're constantly experiencing erection and orgasm. You see? That's not true of girls. Girls don't achieve this automatically. They're liable to learn orgasm. And by the age of 18, only about 40% of Kinsey's women had achieved orgasm, had learned orgasm. Now, whether this figure is changing or not, we don't know. We don't have new Kinsey studies. But there's no question about it, there is a difference. And the difference is very clearly marked between the way males and females grow up feeling sexual.
So it is biological rather than
Well, no, it may
cultural.
be cultural.
Cultural and biological.
Because we do tend to discourage sexuality in girls. I think maybe mothers are more upset if their daughters masturbate than if their sons masturbate.
Right.
You see,
Yes,
it's
yes.
not nice.
Yes.
Males, you expect to, you know, they're going to be sexy anyway.
But you don't feel this double standard should exist?
I don't, no.
Yeah.
On the contrary, there are many, many psychiatrists who feel strongly that girls should be encouraged to masturbate. Certainly there should be no interference, no punishment. Now, I know that the Roman Catholic Church, their most recent position assumed in the last 3 or 4 years is that masturbation is a normal part of adolescence. It's going to be outgrown. And that's truth. I think most people who are seeking a heterosexual relationship will not revert to masturbation except under stress.
Would you just like to talk rather briefly, because we're almost out of time, on the President's Commission on Population Control and the chapters pertaining to sex education?
Well, I think most of the presidential commissions, the one on obscenity and pornography, the one on venereal disease, the task force on homosexuality, and then the one on population policy in the American future, have all recommended sex education, not for children, but as Seekers believes, for all adults, particularly for all adults. All adults, professional and non-professional.
Right. Dr. Mary Calderone, thank you very much. Enjoyed talking to you extremely. Good night from Woman.